So welcome back, everyone, to the Pink Flame of Liberty. I hope you have had a great week. Boy, have I had some active weeks of just getting back in the saddle of being National Secretary. And it's been a lot of work, but also I feel like I'm back where I belong. I'd like to play for you, and in order for you to get the full effect, you will need to go to my YouTube channel at youtube.com/Pink Flame of Liberty. But there was a little compilation video that was put together by my good friend Dan Smots of the YouTube channel The System Is Down. If you like this kind of content, you will definitely like his content. So please go and subscribe. But I'd like to play together this little tribute video he put together for me. I believe he entitled it Reno Recaps Justice for Karen Ann. So let's watch this right now. I am going to have to bleep out something towards the end there. It was my deepest honor to defend Delaware. It was my deepest honor to defend New Hampshire. It was my deepest honor right now to continue to defend Massachusetts. And let me tell you, if tomorrow you need my help, it doesn't matter whether I agree with you now, it would be my deepest honor to defend you. When you guys elected me in 2020, that position was precious to me. And when I defended New Hampshire, I knew it would cost me my position. And I did it anyway. And I would do it again. When you actually are facing something that you know is going to cost you dearly, something you love, I am grateful I passed the test, because we have a bigger test. The state can take away everything. Are we ready to face that test? I hope I am. I hope you are. And I want to be by your side when that test comes. I am asking you, if you weren't here in 2020, for your vote now. And if you were here in 2020, I'm asking you to take back the vote that was stolen from you by the leadership who had no right to do that.
Today we elect the preserver of this party's history and honor what has come before us. Today we defend the woman who has defended each and every one of us, restoring her to a position that she has earned and will continue to show that she has deserved. She has given voice to members finding themselves out of favor with the party elite. And she is a champion for affiliates subjected to fraud, trickery, and the same politics that we all claim to be sick of. When I think of people who poured their soul into the battle that our party fought, I think of the countless hours and the critical counsel offered by no one other than Karen Ann Harlos.
I'll make questionable decisions. I'll be in fact of all I saw.
So with that, let's go into some of what I consider to be the new and improved Libertarian Party that has already happened in a couple of weeks, including our new and improved messaging, which is most important. I did a whole show on this earlier today on my channel, and I'll recap some of that here because I know some of the listeners to the station, probably most of them do not watch the rest of my channel, probably aren't as deeply entrenched into Libertarian Party politics. But I'm hoping our new bold messaging will attract you because it's not compromising, which is what we're used to today. It's politics as usual, and you find it's usually your rights that get compromised away. So I stuck up on my screen something that was tweeted out by the National Party that is going to be a lead up to some of the discussion today, which has to do with the very, very tragic school shooting. I think everyone would agree that was horrific. This tweet came out on June 7th. And as we know, the Uvalde shooting was on May 24th, which has once again, in the mantra of don't let any tragedy go to waste, the government has used that to try to push to take away your rights because think of the children. And I'm not even saying that sarcastically because, oh my God, think of the children. True. The children who will grow up to be adults with rights that they can exercise on their own. You can't sacrifice one person's rights for another. There has to be other ways. If we all agree this was a tragedy, we need to find a non-rights violating way to try to mitigate. Because unfortunately, life is full of tragedy and you can never avoid it 100%. But here's the tweet I wanted to highlight. It said, the powers that be often allege that, quote, you don't need an AR-15, end quote. And it continues, we say that the ATF doesn't need to kill children. The Pentagon doesn't need to send billions of dollars in weapons overseas. The TSA doesn't need to put their hands on your legs, and the IRS doesn't need to audit you. None of these things are needs, but they are things that the government does routinely anyway. So don't tell me what rights I do or I do not need. That is and should be utterly offensive to everyone. But we were treated, I'm using that word quite loosely, this past week, to a very impassioned plea from actor Michael McConaughey regarding the tragedy of that school shooting. Now, some people will probably just think I'm a terrible person for saying this, but I found it deeply offensive and I found it deeply exploitative. I understand he has a personal connection because that was his hometown. But the fact is, dead children should not be political props to push forward a political agenda, a very hot political agenda. I viewed it as grief porn, and I didn't consent to that. And I'm hoping we can move beyond emotions when we talk about these sorts of things. So I have articles here about the shooting that are from two vastly different perspectives. One of them, I mean, there comes to be a point where you do have to talk politics. So I guess both of these views, and even myself, I guess the accusation can be made that we're making political points on the backs of dead children. And we have to be very, very cautious about that. But I don't think you're making a political point when all you're doing is asserting your rights. That's not politics. That's just rights. That's something you have by virtue of being a human being, and the right to self-defense is one of them. Trying to take that away is playing politics. But the first article we're going to talk about is from Reason. I believe that Reason, for the most part, gets things right. They're not always perfect libertarians, because of course I'm the only perfect libertarian. Just kidding. That is an inside joke. But I do find their news coverage very, very helpful. So the title of this one is, Uvalde school officials think hiring even more cops is the solution. Now immediately, right away, that title is like, yeah, so more of them can wait outside? Really? Okay. Well, let's continue. It says, in wake of the mass shooting at Robb Elementary that left 19 kids, my goodness, and 2 adults dead, Uvalde district officials have come up with a plan to make their schools ostensibly safer, hire more police officers. And then it goes on to say that is their goal. But the article continues, there's no reason to think that Uvalde schools employed an insufficient number of police officers. When the shooter, 18-year-old Salvador Ramos, entered the school, locked himself inside a 4th grade classroom, and proceeded to indiscriminately murder children. 19 cops, that's one for every dead child. That was my editorial, quickly arrived on the scene. They had the gunmen completely outnumbered, and in any case, police training instructs officers to confront a mass shooter as speedily as possible without waiting for background. The problem wasn't too few cops. The problem was that the cops didn't do anything. Remember, in a life or death situation, the cops are only, 10 minutes away, whatever the saying might be. In fact, it was a border patrol team that finally, after more than an hour, can you imagine being these parents, ignored the on-scene commander's orders to wait, entered the classroom, and killed Ramos. Meanwhile, police officers harassed, restrained, and arrested parents who were trying to rescue their kids themselves. Those parents are the heroes. Robb Elementary didn't need additional cops. Probably needed, more parents to just mob these cops. It needed cops on hand to actually do their jobs. Uvalde represents one of the most stunning failures in police history, though if you listen to McConaughey, no, it was because we needed to give up our rights. But it is not a failure born of insufficient personnel. With dying children calling 9/11 and begging the cops to intervene as desperate parents tried to free themselves from the clutches of law enforcement in order to help. Uvalde's on-scene commander, Pete Arendado, I probably pronounced that wrong, decided to wait and wait and wait. This was gut-wrenching incompetence, not a lack of cops. So true. But we're not really hearing that because we're trained to just think police officers are the heroes. Everybody in this world can be a hero. You don't become a hero just by putting on a costume and carrying a gun. Not all heroes wear capes, as they say. But now from the other end of the political spectrum, and some of this will probably have to continue after break, but this is from my favorite reactionary, and I mean that by not favorite and I hate it, mailing list that I happen to be on, which is moveon.org. My goodness, pose law in email form. And the title of this reads, White Supremacists Recruiting for Copycat Uvalde Massacres. How do you live with yourself at night? Okay, before we get, though, into the terrible stuff, let's actually do some of the good stuff. And that is one of my personal sponsors, which is Asteros.com, but it's spelled Asteros.com, even though it sounds like Fred Astaire, Asteros. And what they do is cybersecurity services. They will poke and prod at your security, your cybersecurity locks, to let you know where there are weaknesses. And they also do cybersecurity training for your staff or volunteers. You can get a free surface penetration audit where, they do a cursory review, and I bet you they find some weaknesses even with that. You go to asteros.com/free and you can take advantage of that free offer. If I had anything like that, I'd be super curious, even just to see what the vulnerabilities might be. Maybe I'd be pleasantly surprised. With me and I've strengthened my passwords, but I remember some ones I've had in the past have been pretty terrible, so I could just imagine what a hot mess I would have been. And if that doesn't apply to you, isn't something you can use, please pass that code on to a friend. It helps support my show, and it helps support a libertarian owning business. Again, that is Asteros.com, Asteros.com/free. Okay, now back to the barking moon battery from MoveOn.org, who can't seem to move on from the idea that there's white supremacists everywhere. My word, I would not want to live in their world. It must be a scary place. But here we go. Over the bodies of dead children, remember. 11-year-old Uvalde survivor Mia Sorello testified before Congress yesterday that she smeared her dead friend's blood all over her body and played dead in order to survive. Well, that kid's a survivor. I just cannot imagine the impact on her life. But, to start out to this email with this. But when Texas Republican Senator John Cornyn, whom Mitch McConnell tasked as the lead Republican negotiator on any state response to the Uvalde and Buffalo massacres, was asked if the Senate would finally pass gun safety legislation, he responded, not going to happen, because that's not the answer. It's not the answer, because killers are going to kill. And you may go, well, they'll kill more with guns. Would you be less sad if it was 18 children? 17, 16, 15. The issue is violent people, and it's not the violent articles that they can use. And you are taking away the right of self-defense from people who aren't murderers, who aren't criminals. So yes, the correct answer is not going to happen. It would be the equivalent of saying, well, the analogic of saying, I don't want to say equivalent because equivalent does apply, equivalency, but I mean by analogy. There are a ton of people dying in this world who need a kidney. You have two. Are we now going to pass this legislation that will require, if you're the best match, to give up a kidney? What do you want, dead people? and someone says, not going to happen. No, sorry, my kidneys aren't up for negotiation. Well, neither are my rights. My rights are not up for negotiation. And what's funny is in all of this, I'm actually probably one of the better people to speak of it because I'm personally a pacifist. But I defend the right of people to defend themselves lethally. That is a human right. So find another way to solve this real problem. Let's continue. I'm just dying to see how this is white supremacy. No, I'm not. By dying to, I'm like, no, please don't. God, no, please, sweet baby Jesus in a manger. Senator Conan, of course, is supposed to represent the Uvalde families. No, he's supposed to represent everybody and our rights. And the way you honor victims is not by making victims of other people, by taking away their rights. The Department of Homeland Security on Tuesday issued a terror threat bulletin warning. Now, everything is terrorism. Now, when there is overt political goals, the word terrorism is, in fact, very appropriate. But like white supremacy, like racism, it tends to get so overused. Warning that white supremacists and other violent right-wing conspiracy theorists have been encouraging young men to copycat the Uvalde massacre. Goes to footnote number 3. Well, and here's it. Funny, it references something from CBS News, and then the link it gives it's another move on thing. So whatever, we're not going to go to that. You want to know what? Copycat's gonna copycat, but you still haven't tied it. Like, this is a weird, tenuous connection you're trying to make here. If you don't give up your rights to guns, then you're going to cause more white supremacy. Well, how about that all violent people of any political ideology can use any weapon? And in fact, the biggest murderer of minority peoples is our own government, who have alternated between left and right. Are they all white supremacists now? Was Bill Clinton a white supremacist? Was Obama bin Laden, oh my God. President Obama, and I wasn't meaning that as some kind of Freudian slip. It's just my mind goes a million miles a minute. Was he a white supremacist? Is Biden a white supremacist? When everything is white supremacy, nothing is white supremacy. Get a grip, people. Sometimes people are just bad people. It says our communities will not be safe until we pass common sense gun laws. That is just Orwellian doublespeak for until we take away your rights. Not going to happen. As a libertarian, I want to repeal every single gun law we have right now. And I'm not sorry about that. We need to find other ways to prevent violent people from hurting other people. You do not get there by taking away rights. And it's funny, I guess I'm a white supremacist now. I'm sure, if I ever came to any kind of prominence that Move On would ever, pay any attention to the likes of me, which probably isn't going to happen. I just see my little strappies coming through there. Sorry. ADHD sometimes. It's like, look, there's a bird, even though they aren't real. So, no. My answer is just no. And that doesn't make me a bad person. It doesn't make me somebody who doesn't care about dead children. It makes me somebody that cares about everybody's rights. And you have a right to self-defense. And you want to know how to cause more deaths and more human misery? Keep the citizenry from being able to defend itself ultimately against the government. So to go back to that tweet there from the National Libertarian Party, if we don't need AR-15s, and neither does the government, because it's so funny that they are forgetting the historical context of the Second Amendment. It's from a bunch of revolutionaries who knew that sometimes the king's got to go. And our Declaration of Independence says that. Do you think if we all just decided, or some of us just decided one day, we're not really happy with the government we have now. So we want to just go do our own thing. And I know secession has the bad word right now because of how evilly it was used in the past in order to own other people. But the concept in and of itself is a neutral concept. Well, neutral, it's not even a neutral concept. It's a good concept that can be used for evil purposes, same way guns can be. Do you think the United States government would just let us go peacefully? Or are you saying now the Declaration of Independence no longer applies? That when people think there are other ways to best secure their liberty, that it's no longer their right to establish a new governance or to abolish it. That's treason now, right, isn't it? This is why we need guns, ultimately. If we don't need AR-15s, then the government doesn't need AR-15s. Do not forget the historical context. And if you think that is just some kind of quaint history that doesn't happen at all anymore, have you taken a look around the world? Do you forget that the government locked us in our homes not that long ago? And never mind our government. Look at what other governments have done, particularly one where they disarmed all the citizens, Australia. Is that what you want? Well, some of you, the answer may be yes. I doubt it's very many people that are listening to this show. But there may come a day, and I hope it never ever comes. Again, I'm a pacifist, but I'm also a realist. And you do not take away people's right to defend themselves. Never. It's non-negotiable, no, and I do not care what name you call me. No means no, even in this context, especially in this context. But let me describe to you how they have put it, and this is repulsive and shame on you, move on. It is quoting hurting parents. I do not blame the hurting parents. When you are hurting, you will say things. But to use this, it says to some people, to people with money, the people who fund political campaigns, guns are more important than children. I am so sorry what happened to you and that you feel that way. I, in my meager way, fund political campaigns. And no, rights are utmost. They're not more important. It's orthogonal. Everyone's rights matter just as your children's lives mattered. We have to find another way. Welcome back, and remember that you can always get in touch with me at pinkflameofliberty@gmail.org to find out about the super affordable advertising that you can do on this show, which I do get such a kick out of doing the live reads, as I hope you can tell, or give show ideas, questions, or comments. And speaking of advertising, it's my pleasure to advertise for my friend Daniel Lutz, who is asking for your vote. And here's what he says. Fire is a danger to us all. God, we know that so well here in Colorado. I'm originally from Florida, and that just wasn't a thing. Things were always so damp there. Anyway, that was a little bit of an aside, but it threatens our homes, our schools, and our livelihoods. There is a way to provide more funding to our local firefighters without raising taxes on Coloradans. Federal money is given every year to Colorado. 25% of it is meant to support our local fire authorities, but due to omissions and state law, our firefighters are left out of this funding. Our legislatures need to be focused on finding the problems in our laws like this that need to be fixed, not layering more bad laws on top of broken ones. Our government wouldn't have to keep running back to people asking for a tax increase if they spent our money better to begin with. Send Daniel Lutz to Denver, and he will work to bring our spending under control. He knows that it's your money, not the government's, and he will treat it that way. For more information, please visit his website at www.lutz, L-U-T-Z, for 49.org, and this is paid for by the committee to elect Daniel Lutz to House District 49. Thank you so much, Daniel. All right, let's continue with MoveOn.org. And it continues. So, alrighty. She says, well, MoveOn.org, quoting the grieving parent, says that the parent is right. And that's what we need to change by defeating Republicans at the ballot box this November and electing strong Democratic majorities who will put children and communities first always. Is that true? Do you think that the policies of right now, it's the Democratic Party, are causing your family to prosper? I don't. But of course, I don't think the Republicans are better. So as a libertarian, I can, equally dislike both. But that tactic is gross. It is absolutely gross. And are Democrats really always putting communities and children first? Well, let's look at one of their common sense gun regulations that's on their wish list. We got here Representative Don Beyer to seek an aggressive tax on AR-15 style weapons, and he called it a creative pathway to restrict AR-15 sales with only Democratic votes. So, a creative way to restrict your rights. And you want to know what? If we go back in history to marijuana laws, if you remember, it was because, those black people were just getting all wacky with the wacky weed. It was originally very racist in origin. And at first, the government, it didn't outlaw it. It just said you needed to have marijuana tax stamps in order to buy it, but you couldn't get the tax stamps. So it was de facto outlawing it. And so this is exactly what this is doing as well, and we're going to examine it. And the outright dishonesty at the end is just incredible. All right, here we go. So Representative Don Beyer of Virginia, a member of the tax writing House Ways and Means Committee, wants to impose a 1,000% excise tax on AR-15s. Isn't that interesting? So, not really outlawing them, but functionally outlawing them to all but the very rich. And who gets hurt the worst? Disadvantaged communities, black communities. The same black communities where a lot of times there isn't adequate policing, so they do need to defend themselves. I said it in the last segment, when your life is on the line and seconds count, the police are minutes away. You are the ultimate defender of your own life. And do you think that impoverished communities could afford this? This is just like insane. It's punitive. It's a vice tax that Democrats wouldn't tolerate in other contexts. Of course, they wouldn't. I don't consider gun ownership a vice, but I'm giving you, kind of the analogy here. We're going to go to the end here just so I can show you the dishonesty, and then we'll talk about some of the meat in the middle, because this is just absolutely insane what he says here. He says, well, it's not this guy, actually. It's Robert McClellan, a senior fellow at the Urban Brookings Tax Policy Center, said, "We don't have a lot of information on what would happen if gun taxes are raised." We don't know. 1,000% tax? We don't know what will happen. Have you been kidnapped by an alien and your brains have been sucked out your rectum? That's what I want to know. And here, this is Business Insider. He told Business Insider. And then he goes on to say, but a gun tax at 1,000%? I can't see how it would not dissuade some people from purchasing a tax firearm. Well, good. I'm glad you can see that it would dissuade some people. What people might that be? Perhaps the people that might need it the most because they can't afford to hire private security, and perhaps the people who could afford it, well, they can hire security. We don't have a lot of information, but I can't see how it wouldn't. Okay. So I guess it wasn't total dishonesty. It was just like, well, we really don't know, but okay, let's continue. It says, buyer then is telling Business Insider, we think 1,000% fee, now they're calling it a fee, not a tax, on assault weapons is just the kind of restrictive measure that creates enough fiscal impact to qualify for reconciliation. Well, how about this? I've got something creative for you. How about the government, for each of its weapons, pays 1,000% more? Well, no, that really wouldn't work either, because it's our money, not their money. Just trying to find a way where more of our money could come back to us, where, I don't know, they can't raise the budget for the military, but they have to pay that much more for their weapons. Let's see how well that flies, because we can't, as individuals, just all of a sudden go, well, we're just going to print more money for ourselves, or we're just going to raise our budget without having to earn it. That's kind of how the adult world works. Unfortunately, legislatures aren't living in the adult world a lot of times. It says already new AR-15 style guns cost anywhere from $5,000 to $2,000. So 1,000% tax would add $5,000 to $20,000 to the final sales prices, and would probably keep them out of reach from many younger Americans. Is it just younger Americans? That's true. Younger Americans of all classes, except for the really rich. But it would also keep it out of older Americans from economically disadvantaged communities, which would probably be every one of us, except for, again, the very rich, at such an exorbitant rate. What gives you the right to interfere in the market that way? This is what gets me, is where, I don't know how these people summon it up in themselves that they think they have this authority. I've got an idea. What kind of, and maybe this is just me, because this isn't just the Democrats. The Republicans do it too. They think they have the right to rule other people because more people than not put a little check mark next to their name. That gives them magical authority that each and every one of us don't have. Why do we grant this mystical authority to government? And I was going to go on about, I still will a little bit until the end of this segment, about this whole, new gun control push. But there's actually something I want to read to you guys that is so poignant from a book I'm going over with my patrons on my YouTube channel. But let's finish this up briefly. And then when we come back from the break, I will read that and maybe wrap a little bit more. And continue, it says some details of the bill are not finalized, such as when the tax would take effect and what to do with any revenue raised. Just not even. It's also unclear how much money it would generate. The idea isn't revenue generation, though, of course, the government, like the greedy ticket if only, that was my wishful thinking, that it would, suck any money that it could get. It's not going to generate much. It says that right now, at least as of 2014, AR-15 style rifles accounted for 1 in 5 guns purchased in the U.S. Oh, and interesting, this goes to what I said. Law enforcement agencies in the military would not be subject to the tax. You don't say. Imposing laws on everyone else that you exempt yourself from. As the church lady would say, ain't that special? My God, the hypocrisy. Bullets wouldn't be subject to the new tax. Oh, isn't that nice? Oh, our overlords have decided, well, if you can spit them really fast out of your mouth, well, you are good. But high-capacity magazines that can carry more than 10 rounds of ammunition would be aggressively taxed at that level. Basically, making guns illegal without making them illegal. This is disgusting with a capital D. Okay, and welcome back to the final segment. And I had said there was this just great portion, it's almost like a parable, in a book I wanted to read to you that kind of highlighted my whole frustration, because I do think, I know I wouldn't have gotten it. Like if I had heard someone talking like me, it would have taken me a little bit, because we're just so conditioned to accept that other people just have this right to have authority over us. So this is a fantastic book. I haven't finished it, going through it, have skimmed through it, have heard interviews with this gentleman and stuff, but it's called The Problem of Political Authority. And the author should be near and dear to us in Colorado, because he is a professor at I believe it's, the University of Colorado Boulder. And it's Michael Huemer. And excellent book. Just really logically lays out the case for why political authority is such a problem. And he doesn't straw man, which is one thing I like. So we're just going to start here in chapter 1 and 1.1. And actually, he calls it a political parable. And I forgot that he did, but I knew it was in the form of a parable of sorts. So hear me out. Let us begin with a short political story. You live in a small village with a crime problem. Vandals roam the village, stealing and destroying people's property. No one seems to be doing anything about it. So, one day, you and your family decide to put a stop to it. You take your guns and go looking for vandals. Periodically, you catch one. Take him back to your house at gunpoint and lock him in the basement. You provide the prisoners with food so they don't starve, but you plan to keep them locked in the basement for a few years to teach them a lesson. After operating in this way for a few weeks, you decide to make the rounds of the neighborhood, starting with your next-door neighbor. As he answers the door, you ask, "Have you noticed the reduction in crime in the last few weeks?" He nods. "Well, that is thanks to me." You explain your anti-crime program. Noting the wary look on your neighbor's face, you continue. "Anyway, I'm here because it's time to collect your contribution to the Crime Prevention Fund. Your bill for the month is $100. As your neighbor stares at you, making no apparent move to hand over the money, you patiently explain that, should he refuse to make the required payment, you will unfortunately have to label him a criminal, at which point he will be subject to long-term confinement in your basement, along with the aforementioned vandals. Indicating the pistol at your hip, you note that you are prepared to take him by force if necessary. Supposing you take this tack with all of your neighbors, what sort of reception could you expect? Would most cheerfully give over their assigned share of the costs of crime prevention? Not likely. In all probability, you would observe the following. First, almost none would agree that they owe you anything, while some might pay up for fear of imprisonment in your basement, and a few might pay up out of hostility toward the vandals. Almost none would consider themselves duty-bound to do so. Those who refuse to pay would more likely be praised than condemned for standing up to you. Second, most would consider your actions outrageous. Your demands for payment would be condemned as naked extortion, and your confinement of those who refuse to pay as kidnapping. The very outrageousness of your conduct, combined with your deluded presumption that the rest of the village would recognize an obligation to support you, would cause many to question your sanity. I think all of that is undoubtedly true, and the very just ludicrousness of the story should strike you. But wait, there's more, like with Ginsu knives. What does this story have to do with political philosophy? In the story, you behaved like a rudimentary government. Though you did not take on all the functions of a typical modern state, you assumed two of its most central roles. You punished people who violated others' rights or disobeyed your commands, and you collected non-voluntary contributions to finance your activities. In the case of the government, these activities are referred to as the criminal justice system and the tax system. In your case, they are referred to as kidnapping and extortion. But on the face of it, your activities are of the same kind as those of a government. Yes, yet most people's evaluations of the government are far more lenient than their evaluations of you in the story. Most people support the state's imprisonment of criminals, feel obligated to pay their taxes, And consider punishment of tax evaders both desirable and within the rights of the state. By the way, I only praise tax evaders. If you are evading your taxes, now, I'm too scared to get into trouble, so I don't. I wish I could, but, I don't want to get into trouble, and the government can do that. But if you have that courage and you've managed to get away with it, good on you for not being stolen from. This illustrates a general feature of our attitudes towards government. Governments are considered ethically permitted to do things that no non-governmental person or organization may do. Why? Why? At the same time, individuals are thought to have obligations to their governments that they would owe toward no non-governmental person or organization, even if non-governmental agents behave similarly to a government. And I know the first answer of some of you is, well, we elect our government. So if you in the story got 50% of your neighbors to agree with you, could you then extort and kidnap the rest of them and perhaps exempt you guys from all of this? Starting to see the problem here? I hope so. This is not simply a point about the law, nor is it about what sorts of actions one can get away with it. The point is that our ethical judgments differentiate sharply between governmental and non-governmental actions. Acts that would be considered unjust or morally unacceptable when performed by non-governmental agents will often be considered perfectly all right, even praiseworthy when performed by government agents. Why do we accord this special moral status to government, and are we justified in doing so? That is the problem of political authority. Preach it, Brother Humor. And I really think you should consider that really, really seriously. And I just realized, I think earlier in the show I said Michael instead of Matthew. In referring to the movie star, shows you how much I care about movie stars. And I know there will be someone who go, you said just immediate segment that this would ban all guns. I meant those kinds of guns, obviously in context. Okay, now that I've done my errata, let's go back to dumb gun laws or gun-related laws. This one perhaps takes the cake. Ooh, cake. I really would love some cake right now. And I believe this is it from Reason? I believe it is. And it says New York's body armor ban may be the stupidest gun legislation yet. Oh, why? So, guns are bad, right? We don't agree there, but we're following progressive logic. And people getting killed by guns is bad when they're good people, not criminals, not somebody who's trying to kill you. We all agree on that. But somehow, the progressives get to then, let's make it harder for people to protect their bodies from being killed by guns. Okay. That made sense? That didn't make sense to me. Why would you ban something that cannot be used violently as part of your omnibus? Let's get rid of things that can be used violently. Well, of course, my libertarian mind goes to that's so you can't protect yourself against the state, even non-offensively, even just defensively, by wearing body armor. Okay, that's what I immediately go to. But let's see what is said here. Oh, and they made the same point I did right here. These are protective devices incapable of offensive use unless thrown especially hard. And they're now unavailable for legal purchase by New Yorkers seeking even the most passive means of defending themselves and their loved ones. Wow. And here's what the assemblyman who who supported this, said there was the reason. As in far too many other mass shootings, the gunman in Buffalo went into the store wearing a bulletproof vest so he would be safe while he slaughtered innocent victims. And unless your profession puts you at risk of gun violence, there's no reason you need this kind of body armor. Well, I don't need to give you reasons to buy something that is peaceful, dear sir. This bill will keep bulletproof vests out of the hands of those who want to protect themselves from law enforcement. Because, oh my goodness. Any more tone deaf? Daniel Schaefer, anyone? Or other security officers while harming others. What about when those people go rogue and might be trying to harm you? No, can't have that because government is always right. It says, while it's true that some mass murderers wore body armor, the same factors that drive sales to the public at large is specifically the ability to protect users from injury. So if something can be used by bad guys, we can't have the good guys use them for good purposes. This is literal insanity.
You gotta take what you're given, that's how we live it. Don't be mad at the system, it's simply how we've existed. I hear a lot of people talking like they politicians and choose to be an accountant because it's safe in the business, not because they want to